Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And joining me temporarily from Costa Rica is Andrew Navaro from Earthborne Games. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're taking a break from all of your friends, guests, whatever situation is going on there where they're eating dinner and you're here talking to me from Costa Rica to Alaska.
It's an amazing world we live in, isn't it?
For sure, for sure. So, speaking of an amazing world, dude, you just came out with this game. It's getting delivered to backers. Earthborne Rangers is beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's lush. And that's the reason why we're here, to talk about like the long road getting to the point of this game coming out. How long have you been working on Earthborne Rangers?
Oh, man. Well, we're still working on it because we're working on the campaign expansion right now. So I've been working on Earthborne Rangers for about 3.5 years at this point.
What was the genesis? Because I noticed when you go to the BGG page for this, most of the times you go to the BGG page and you see like there's a designer or there's two designers. But you got a whole handful of designers on this project. I feel like there's some kicking around, wheeling and dealing, you know, like there's a real game design soup going on here. So tell me about the origins.
Yeah, so, well, from that perspective, I started working with Adam and Brady Sadler, who are two guys who I enjoy quite a bit. They've, I think most recently with Blacklist, maybe Brady was with Lucky Duck for a little bit. But they both worked at FFG, and I got to know them there. And they did some freelance work for us during my time at FFG. Anyway, I like them a lot, and I know they really like card games, so I had this idea to do kind of an LCG-style game. At the time, when I was talking to them first, like at the beginning of 2020, it was very different from what it eventually became. At the time, I really wanted to, start my new company off strong by creating a product that had good cash flow. Like that's something that Christian Peterson taught me about really early on, is like the importance of cash flow for a board game company. And I knew how the LCGs worked, with the releases every month or every other month, but they've turned into every quarter or every year now. So I originally envisioned this game as a game that was more like a traditional like LCG style game that came out with monthly releases so that we could have a solid foundation of money coming in and we could build from there. That all went out the window really fast.
Yeah.
All through like the first like year and a half, 2 years of working on Earthborne, the thing I learned the most was making those style of games requires a huge team. To do them at that pace. And since I'd never really done anything on my own to this degree, I just didn't have the context for that. So that ended up just being something that was not possible to do. There's no way me and a couple of freelancers could put out a quality product like every couple months. It just wasn't going to happen.
Not very viable.
No, not at all. Just not possible. And there's a lot of things I've learned running my own company in the last few years that where I've gained all sorts of new perspective and appreciation for the different roles at Asmodee and FFG that I knew about but didn't fully comprehend until I had to do it myself.
Right.
So, but anyway, originally approached the Sadlers because I knew they were big fans of Arkham Horror. They really liked the LCGs. They liked Lord of the Rings, the card game. And I wanted to do a cooperative card game along, kind of a similar type thing. And I knew they'd be interested in doing the design. So I had some basic ideas that I brought to them. And I had some very specific ones, like I wanted to feel kind of like an RPG. I had the challenge resolution system, just a basic idea of what I wanted because I had played Gloomhaven recently and I liked the card reveal thing. I was like, we could do something like that.
Yeah, the DNA is totally in there.
Yeah. And then, I talked about a couple other things and said, just go. So they started working on the first version of the game in early 2020. And at that same time, I was working with Sam Gregor Stewart on the world. And as they were putting together the skeleton of the design, we were fleshing out the details of what would become the valley.
Now, the world itself, this is a post-apocalyptic game, and you don't, shy too much away from that. It's not like a big reveal. You can see remnants of future technology in here. Was that something that was important to you or the team from the get-go to kind of set in this post-apocalypse fantasy a la, say, Thundar the Barbarian or Sword of Shannara or something like that?
Well, so I don't like using the word fantasy because to me that says from the get-go, like, this isn't possible.
Right.
And what I really wanted to try to do was create a world that seemed somewhat believable, that we could potentially get there. And I really wanted to set the story, set the world after all the troubles are done. Like, I didn't want to dwell in that Fallout style. Everything is horrible all the time. People are horrible to each other. I wanted to get past that and not necessarily like gloss over it, like be respectful of the time that has passed, but show that we went through a troubled time. We came out on the other side, and now this is where we are. So we have this, like apocalypse. It's not necessarily an apocalypse because the people of the Earth figure stuff out.
Right.
And while not everyone made it through that period, and it was a difficult period of the setting's history, everyone came out the other side of that way better off. So I think that was, for me, like working with Sam, the thing that was most interesting to me was trying to put ourselves in that headspace of, say, 2,500 years in the future. People have gone through this thing. How different are they than we are? Like, what is their frame of reference? How would they treat each other? What things would be important to them? What would their values be? What would their technology be like? How would they want to live? These were all questions that were super interesting to me, far more interesting than just what most, post-apocalyptic games, futuristic games set on Earth dwell in, which is mostly human misery. And I just wasn't interested in dealing in any of that stuff.
Even apart from post-apocalyptic games, just apart from most games in general, especially campaign games, one of the things that struck me is just the kind of tonal quality, the texture of the world is not inherently combative, right? Like you definitely have dangers and threats and suspense in the world, but this isn't inherently a game of survival. It's not inherently a game of conquest. It's not inherently a game of I need to go to this castle to kill these people. You are helpers, you are rangers. You are the people who are helping the denizens of this valley through their highs and lows and the various things that you can do. And that must seem like such a distinct thematic direction to go into as compared to your lengthy history at Fantasy Flight Games, for sure, where, you guys were known as the brawlers, right? The brawlers, the beaters, the mystery, the explorers, like all that kind of stuff. Was that aspect, like bringing a new flavor to even what the concept of adventuring in this world would be?
Yeah, and that was really important. Because I feel like, like you just listed off, like there's so many games, most games in the hobby space deal in kind of the same thing. It's a lot of combat, a lot of conflict, and violence, and all stuff, that like I've enjoyed. I enjoyed working on all of those things. I still enjoy playing those games. But there's so many of those things. I didn't feel like doing another one is really necessary. So,
right.
Yeah, so I really wanted to try something different that could be appealing to more people. Because I feel like this kind of like deeper card game that's it's it's got basic systems that are pretty easy to understand, but it's got like a layer of complexity that if you haven't played a game like this before, like a Magic or any kind of collectible card game or a cooperative card game before, it can be pretty daunting. But I feel like when you try to share these games with other people, oftentimes the theme is what turns them off, not the complexity of the mechanics. So I wanted to make a game that you could play with your kids and not worry about like, oh, there's this really like, it's really fun. Don't worry about all the gross imagery.
Right.
And
right.
like, like Arkham Horror the card game. It's a great game. I love it. But it has like images of people like gouging their eyes out. Like just lots of really, really intense, gross imagery. And what happens to your characters is really intense. And it's, I think there's a fair amount of people who are just kind of put off by that type of thing. So I wanted to create something that provided a similar level of depth and complexity, but was appealing to more people, and like I said, and brought something different, something that I wanted to create a world that felt good to be in.
Yeah, I like the idea that the game compels you to help, but not out of like a personal gain. Like I've seen some other open world type of card games. I've played Seventh Continent and really enjoyed that. Or I've played Sleeping Gods, for example, has an open world system. But in both of those, the thrust of the game is survival. You've been put into a dangerous survival situation. So any help that you're giving is really about this self-centered notion that I need to survive. This game, you drive forward because you want to help other people solve their problems. And I think that alone gives it just enough of a twist that lets it stand apart and also feels so obvious at the same time, right? Like, like, come on, there's 1,000 of these other games, which are great games, but how many games, at least in the campaign adventure game space, are you like just a helper? You're someone helping people with their personal or great global problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I would be a fool if I didn't talk to you a little bit about like your lengthy history in this entire career that you've had. I definitely want to talk more about Earthborne Rangers and Earthborne Games as a company, but let's give us a little bit more context for how you got here. Now, you spent a lot of time, 15 years at Fantasy Flight Games?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were you a Minnesota guy to start with, or did you end up getting recruited over to there?
No, not at all. Actually, I was born in Wisconsin, which neighbors Minnesota. But I moved to Ohio when I was a teenager, or when I was younger. I was there through my teen years. I went to school down there. And then just life circumstances led me back up north. I ended up in Minnesota. And at the time when I got the job at FFG, I had been working for maybe about a year as a freelance illustrator for a lot of like indie RPG projects that I just kind of found my way there through this website called The Forge. Online, which is
old school.
Yeah. It was great. Like so I got in touch with a bunch of guys there and just did some jobs. And then every time I'd do a job, people would then refer me to other people. And then I just was doing more and more for very, very little money. But it was a lot of fun because I was technically like unemployed at the time.
Technically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was unemployed enough to collect unemployment checks. It was the first time that I've ever been like fired from a place. I used to work at Starbucks, and I, through some ridiculous circumstance, ended up getting fired by Starbucks. And but then you had this awesome opportunity to So you have money through unemployment, but then work on my art skills and my freelance. And that was really, really awesome. It was an amazing moment in my life where all I did all day long was just draw, and it was great. It was so much fun, and my skills improved vastly in that time. And but it didn't last forever. Obviously, eventually I had to get a job, and it had been maybe a couple months. I had gone to Gen Con. I'd shown my stuff around. I didn't really get a whole lot of bites. It was near the end of the D20 era, and when everyone was doing all these D20 supplements that had all these really cool like pencil illustrations or like black and white illustrations, and that's like what I was best at. So I feel like I missed out on my window of working on Dungeons and Dragons products by a couple of years. But during that time, I stopped by the FFG booth at Gen Con and showed my stuff there to a guy named Rob Vaughn, who was in charge of the RPGs at the time. He and I later became friends, obviously. But he said he'd call. He said he'd send me an email. He never did. But when my unemployment was running out, I needed to find a job. I had gotten like a temp job someplace. I was like stuffing envelopes or something, and almost everywhere I'd ever work for like temp work or whatever, I'd always end up getting offered like a full-time job because I'm a reasonably capable person, do a good job. They're like, yeah, let's just hire that guy. So I had an opportunity to get this, I don't know, another administration job in an office building, and I was like, man, I don't want to do that again. I'd done that once before, and it was there a couple times before, and it's I don't know, it was very, very draining on me. But then my wife suggested I look online to see if Fantasy Flight was hiring because she remembered that they were in town. So I did, and they were for a customer service position. So I applied, got the job, and that's how I started in 2004. So customer service for FFG.
2004. Let's see here. Battlestar Galactica had not come out yet, or had
no, because I worked on Battlestar Galactica. No, the games that came up that were pretty new at the time was Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition. Mm-hmm. Doom had just come out.
There you go. Warrior Knights, maybe around there.
Nope, because I worked on that
okay,
one too,
there you worked on all of them, of course.
So yeah, Doom was a big one because I remember seeing that and being like, oh man, that looks like Space Hulk. I'm excited about that. It ended up being nothing like Space Hulk, much to my disappointment. But War of the Ring had just come out, and FFG had published that in the States.
Right.
Yeah, so right around that time. So I started doing customer service, and then from there I ended up getting a job in graphic design, and then I worked in graphic design for about 6 years, and I worked on Warrior Knights, Battlestar Galactica, Cosmic Encounter,
Game of Thrones Second Edition, maybe.
Game of Thrones Second Edition, yep. No, I didn't work on Game of Thrones Second Edition, the board game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I worked on the card game.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, the first version of the LCG, that was me. Yeah, that board game was Kevin Childress. He worked on that.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so I worked on a bunch of stuff over those 6 years, and then dabbled a little bit in art direction during that time, and then ended up a position opened up to run the art department, which was kind of a new thing because art had been done by pretty much one person up to that point. But we were doing all these LCGs, we were doing all these 40K RPGs. We had so much art, it was ridiculous. So we needed a honest to goodness department. So Chris promoted me to do that, and I did that for a few years. And then after that, I moved on to our digital team to work on some apps and the app integrated board games. So like Mansions of Madness, XCOM.
Yeah.
Yep, XCOM was the first one. Man, that was something.
I mean, that's actually, to me, like, I've been playing games my entire life, for a variety of games, starting with Hero Quest and then, like playing Magic when it first came to Alaska, 1994 2005, I think, is when Bosco's Cards, Comics, and Games got this new game, Magic, and my older brother and I playing that, and then, following through games. But I think the first time when I really heard about this controversy of app integrated games, like the game is not playable unless you have a device, was with XCOM. And you had a hot designer on the game, you had a legendary publisher at that point, because like if you were into American style games, then you were into Fantasy Flight games, and then XCOM is also one of the most legendary computer gaming properties, and so like it kind of put all this attention on it, and man, the number of internet fights over whether or not apps belonged integrated with board games was something else.
We were definitely Chris really believed really strongly in it, and it was a pretty intense project to work on. But it was a lot of fun, learned a lot. And then, we applied a lot of that knowledge to Manch's Madness 2nd edition, which I think is a much, much better integration of an app. And then later, obviously, much later, onto, the current version of Descent, which I think is kind of like the pinnacle of the integration of the app in a board game.
Totally.
Yeah. So then after that, I became the creative director at FFG, and then became the head of studio.
So when did you become creative director, like roughly?
2015, 14.
Okay.
16.
Wow.
Yeah. I wasn't in that role for very long. I was a kind of a training wheels role before I became head of studio.
During this time, you got to see the incredible shift in this industry, right? Like when you started at Fantasy Flight Games, no one had heard of crowdfunding a project, right?
Yeah.
Crowdfunding a project meant Christian T. Peterson trying to, get people to help fund Twilight Imperium First Edition. That's what that meant.
Yeah.
How long during this trajectory, 2016, 15, 16, you become creative director. Was there any point during this where you were like, what if I had my own studio?
I started to think about it a little bit, just starting to get ideas for things, like, and wondering, maybe I'd be interested in going off and doing it on my own. But I don't know. It was working at FFG was challenging at times, for sure, but it was also incredibly satisfying.
Right.
And I got to work with some really amazing, talented, and knowledgeable people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So like, I wasn't like hot to leave or anything like that. Most of my experience in talking about crowdfunding was mostly like us looking at it as, what is this? Is this something that we should do as a public? Like, this seems weird if we were to do it because we're established. We don't need to do it, but man, look at how much money they're making. So a lot of conversations wondering if it's something we should do or not. A lot of really interesting observations from the people on the business side who saw what was possible through crowdfunding and not possible through the traditional methods. Because, at FFG, we were making products for distribution. So, the goals there are very, very different than the goals of a game that comes to a crowdfunding campaign.
Right.
Like, you can do whatever you want because you're taking all that margin for yourself. So, like, if you're charging, like $200 for a game that costs you like $75 to make, fine.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work when you're making games for distribution. So I remember it being like just kind of like an eye-opening moment for some people to just see what could be done, and maybe a little bit of envy and jealousy going on. But thankfully, while we were there, we were still we had so much success that there was very little that we couldn't do. Right. If we put our mind to it. Sometimes we did things that maybe we shouldn't have done just because we could, but I'm glad we did them anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And, like, we don't have to dwell on this. I'm sure that you've been asked privately or publicly a million times about, the transition from Fantasy Flight Games to FFG being Asmodee USA and that kind of stuff, and your exit. But, clearly at a certain point, you decided, I am going to, take a chance on creating your own studio, working with other folks who you knew through the industry, who may have worked with you at Fantasy Flight or, been contracted with Fantasy Flight at a certain point. What are some of the things, like, just as a publisher or a studio, that you have as a freedom or something that you're still amazed by, like, oh, I can just do this now. I'm not covered by the red tape, like whether it was Asmodee or maybe it was, having a boss or someone else, but you can just go, that's awesome that I can just make this decision.
Yeah, no, that's it right there. I don't have anyone that I need to report to, like, except in some ways the backers.
Of course.
I think our backers have been awesome. They've been very, very supportive, and haven't really bristled at any of the creative decisions that I've made. Because I think when I've talked about it, like, I've been pretty clear where the game that I'm making, even though obviously I appreciate the backer support and couldn't do it without them. I think they know, at least I hope they know, that the game's going to be better for me to not do what they want, but to do what we think is best. So just being able to rely on my own creativity and my own direction and make decisions is awesome. Like, I love not having to justify any creative decision to anybody.
You got an example, like a specific example of something where you're like, I know this would not fly had I been working for another publisher?
Yeah, well, the scope of the game definitely wouldn't fly at all. The style of the game, it being a card game that's expensive, that's all in one box, is like, even people who understand pricing still get weird about there being like $100 card game.
Oh yeah.
Even when I point out, like, again, to the example of Arkham Horror, like, hey, if you buy this campaign expansion and the player box, it's more than $100. Like, and
right?
you want them both. Like, you're going to spend more. Like, I'm putting it all in one box and it's less. Why are you freaking out about the price? So that's funny. So yeah, so that's one thing I think for sure would be really, really challenging at a traditional publisher, especially the way that we produced it, because pretty much every decision I made on the manufacturing side made the game more expensive, and that is the opposite of what you do when you're trying to run a for-profit business.
well, let's take a tangent on that, because it's clear, that there is a commitment to certain ecological and sustainable standards in the production of the game. Like, it's all recyclable components, right? There's not an ounce of plastic that I found, at least in the review copy that I got said.
Yeah, no.
The cards were wrapped, in recyclable materials instead of cellophane, and that really impressed me. Like, that was just like a tonal difference in opening the box and seeing what was in there. Was that something that came out of like your commitment to the theme of the game and it just occurred to you in the middle of production, or was that like one of those decisions that was foundational to the company starting out?
Yeah, that was foundational to the company. When I first started out, I was working with another guy who I'd worked with at Asmodee named Michael Hurley, and we kind of started on it together. And then I ended up kind of just taking it over on my own after a little bit. But that was something that I thought was really important to try to push for. And the fact that we were going to try to go to crowdfund, not necessarily crowdfunding, but try to not really engage in distribution, try to go direct to consumer and then to like individual retailer partnerships, knowing that we were going to be capturing more of that margin because of that fact, made us feel like we could push the sustainability side and do things more responsibly. But yeah, as far as it being married to the theme, that was just kind of a happy accident. It's just kind of the way things worked out. And it's a nice confluence of things for sure, but that was not part of a master plan. It just all kind of came together that way. I think maybe just because that's where my head was as we were developing the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just, again, kind of has this narrative, I guess, of being, like a different approach to things. We don't have to do things the same way that we've always done them in the past, which,
yeah,
I, as a reviewer who gets sent games great and small to check out, I buy games I'm interested in, like I try to not be a hoarder and have every game under the sun, like I only want to have so many games that I'm going to be able to get to the table. And even the amount that I do keep is still too many. And I look at the pile of games that I have to find homes for because I cannot throw them away. Like I am unwilling to throw them away, not just because they're games, but because I don't want to have a landfill full of miniatures.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different approach that I really appreciate. Yeah. Now, the opposite must also be true to my earlier question about the freedoms and luxuries you have as your own publisher. There's got to be a couple moments where during the production of this game that you were like, oh man, this problem would have been solved by someone else had I still been at FFG. Like, you ever run into any of those moments?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I think all through production and then through fulfillment and post production, that was all stuff that's brand new to me. I was obviously aware of it and worked with people who worked on that thing and were, I was part of the leadership group at FFG for over a decade. So I got to sit in on lots of meetings and learn lots and lots and lots from those people. But like I said earlier, hearing about a thing and doing a thing are just completely different. Because like when you're here in a meeting and someone's complaining about one problem or another, you go, oh yeah, that sounds tough. And like, oh yeah, I would do that. And then, then you don't actually have to do it. That this goes off, and then you hear the report of how it went later on. But yeah, it's really challenging. And to try to do all that while still making time to do the creative work is also very challenging. So you end up going through all these peaks and valleys of, I'm doing creative work for this month, and then I'm completely neglecting this entire other portion of the business. And then I'm doing this other part of the business here, and I'm completely neglecting the creative part. So just having a small team where it's me, it's three other guys, two are full-time and one's part-time. And that, that is a much smaller team than what we had when I was working at FFG. So we all have to do different things. And I kind of like when I worked at FFG, I take on all of the things that I know no one else would want to do, even though I don't want to do them.
I know that role.
Yeah. So I end up doing that a lot, and I'm not necessarily like the best at any of these things because I've never done them before. So I totally made some mistakes. And hopefully I've learned from them, and next time around I won't make them again. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely times where I, especially when I discovered so we had a punch board issue with the printing where I realized that much to my dismay that we had submitted the wrong files for the B side of the punch board. And I kept replaying the moment in my head when I approved that punch board, and I could see it and I knew it. And I was like, oh man, how could I have made that mistake? And it's there's just so much going on. But then making the decision to reprint the punch and then everything that followed. I don't know if I would do that again. Like, I think the version of the game you got has the incorrect punch board.
Yep.
But for the copies that we had extra that were intended for people to buy who didn't back the game, we repacked it with an additional sheet of punch. So we spent all that money on that thing. We put it on. At the end of the day, I don't know how many people would have actually cared. We probably would have been better off just printing some extra punch and then shipping it out to anyone who asked for it. Yeah. So anyway, decisions like that where where I got to that moment where I was like, what should I do? Should I try to fix it or should I leave it? And there's no one really to turn to.
Right.
To ask, what should I do? I could ask people for like, what do you think? But ultimately I got to make that decision.
You could call up Chris, be like, mentor me, tell me what to do.
You'd say you should have done a better job checking your proofs. So anyway, yeah, stuff like that is really, really hard. And yeah, you in those moments, I just really wanted to, hide. But then you have to make the decision. You have to tell the backers what's happening. You got to say, hey, in that moment, it's like, well, we're just going to delay the game a bit. So sorry. Hey. And yeah, none of that stuff was fun. I was pretty down in the dumps after that.
Someone needs to make a call, and people are still pretty stoked about the game anyway. Now,
yeah, exactly. No, that's the good thing is everyone's still really enthusiastic, which is awesome.
Right,
and we're almost there.
Almost there. So with the game, the actual gameplay itself, and like entering into the world of the game, one thing that I just was over the moon about in my review, which even if I wasn't trying to avoid spoilers, I would have spent so much time gushing about, was the tutorial. I feel like it is a tutorial that seems so obvious and so natural in retrospect, but feels like I've never seen anything like it personally in the tabletop boxed adventure games. Talk to me about the evolution of this tutorial that handles narrative, character creation. It handles introduction to rules concepts unfolding as you go.
Yeah, so this was in your list of things that you wanted to talk about, and I was trying to remember what made me think of this. And I think ultimately what happened is I just woke up one day with this idea where I wanted to make a game out of the character creation process. I wanted to create because I know that people who come to this style of game, they can be really intimidated by the prospect of building a deck. And since our character creation process is so thematic, can you hear that dog barking in the background?
I love dogs, so it's just flavor,
All right,
adds character to the interview.
We've been adopted by a dog down here, so he's been hanging out for the past few days. Costa
Rica, I expected velociraptors,
I haven't gone too much in the jungle yet, so maybe they're out there. So it kind of started with this thinking about the deck building process as making it a kind of a drafting game between the people at the table. So you could do it together. You don't need to make any really crunchy rules decisions. You don't need to spend a whole lot of time reading cards. You can just kind of pick the things you think look cool and put them in your deck and then go and just get a feel for how the systems work. Because also another thing about deck building in these games is that you're kind of asked to build your deck before you even have an opportunity to play it.
You're right.
So it's like, how do I know what I want in my deck without, I have no context for any of these things. I think that sounds good. Maybe I'll put that in there, but then you play it like, this is terrible. So trying to create a game experience where you were eased into the game's concepts and also eased into the deck building, because the way you build your decks is kind of modular. Like you have your background, your specialty, your personalities. It allowed me to segment that out so that you could introduce them slowly. And then by the end, you have your full deck, and then you have at least some sense of how the game is played. And then at the end, we give you the opportunity, like, hey, if you want to change everything, go ahead. But
Right.
you get the idea. So yeah, it just kind of came to me one day, and I think when I think back to similar experiences, I think probably the most similar is like the beginning of like an Elder Scrolls game.
Right.
I just played the opening of Oblivion again the other day. I was like, yeah, this is really similar to what we're doing, where it's taking you through it. It introduces concepts. It like brings things to your character. And then before you go out in the world, you have a chance to undo everything and start all over again.
It's a completely familiar experience, just not in the context that you have it. And you must be one of the few people on the planet that has spent more time than me thinking about how games are taught, right? And I've obsessed over this, both in a tabletop and video game thing. Like I one time heard Shigeru Miyamoto, the famous creator of Mario and Zelda and all that kind of stuff, like explaining.
I know of him.
yes. I one time heard him explaining the opening of the original Mario Brothers, where like if you have the controller and you're just moving forward, the first thing that you do is you have that direction pad. You can't move left. Okay, I can't up and down. They don't do anything. I move right, and you just hold that button down, and boom, you die by Goomba. Okay. So then you start right over at the beginning, and then you go, what else can I do? I move over. Okay. And then I have jump. Okay. I jump over the Goomba. And just like everything about the first level, 1-1, is designed in such a way to organically teach you this. Now, that's not the same thing that you can do in a tabletop game, because you can't just feel your way through it. There's rules that you have to apply. The game can't apply them on you in the same way that a video game can. But the kind of unfolding process is about as naturalistic or organic of a product or a progress through the tutorial that I can imagine. I'm wondering if in your play testers, was that something that, really struck them? Was it, something that was just kind of glanced over? For me, it felt like this is the evolution. Knowing your history, I remember when Fantasy Flight had the tome of a rule book that was, indecipherable. I remember when, like Eldritch Horror had the separate rules reference and then the learn to play guide. I remember when Imperial Assault came out with 3 rule books, and clearly you've spent a lot of time thinking about how people absorb information in games.
Yeah 100 absolutely. And I went through that too, and at Chip Theory, because I worked on Cloudspire second edition, and we did a tutorial for that. And it was really important for me to try to do something that was not what we ended up doing in Cloudspire, or not doing what is done in Root, where the game is really, you're just following the instructions and you're not really making any decisions. You're just doing what it says. And from my experience, because I've played Root a few times, but not in such quick succession that I never had to play the tutorial.
Right.
But it's because of the way that it's structured and how prescriptive it is. It never lodges in my brain. I can never remember how to play because I'm not actually thinking. I'm just doing what it tells me to do.
You're performing.
So I know you called it a tutorial. It's the prologue. I think I tried to say, even in the beginning, like, this is not a tutorial.
Yeah.
Though a lot of people feel like it should be, or call it a tutorial kind of colloquially. And actually some of the feedback I've gotten from some people is like that it's not prescriptive enough. Like, it's too freeform. It leaves out details. I'm like, yeah, it leaves out details. It's fine. But like, I tried to have this thing where it's like, this is a way of bringing other people into the game, or a way of trying to test your knowledge of the game after you've read the rule book.
Right. And I think that's exactly what worked for me, is that when I read a rule book that's linear, unless it's an incredibly simple game, then I have like this bank of information, but it really isn't applied to anything, right? And then there's a
Right.
second time of learning the game where you sit down and you have the rule book and you're like, okay, now I'm going to play around with the components and actually kind of check my understanding. And that's doubly hard in a game with a lot of systems and a lot of expectations. And it's a game that wants to be different than most other games out there. Like, this is not, oh, it's another version of Descent. It's not Arkham Horror. If you know Arkham Horror, then you're going to be able to pick this up, no problem. This is a fundamentally different system. And reading the rule book start to finish, which I did before sitting down with the prologue, it was, kind of abstract. I was like, okay, I kind of get it. I don't know. I can hang up anywhere. Or what are the consequences? Is this going to work? But with that context, then sitting down with the prologue, it was just such a fluid experience. And yeah, I did have to reference back to things and check my understanding. But I got to tell you, it's a hell of a lot better than learning War of the Ring for the first time with the original rulebook, because I had that first edition.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, no, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, the feedback we got from the testers was really positive. Yeah, I was really excited about it. It's I think rules wise, content wise, it's maybe the only thing in the game that I've like really authored myself. So I was really glad. I was nervous to have it tested, but it went over really well with everybody, and they had a really good time. And yeah, we've gotten lots of positive feedback on it. I'm glad people enjoy it. And it's only a couple pages, which is great.
This game is an open world game, which means there's a lot of content that in one campaign, which can take place over many sessions, without getting too spoilery here. How difficult was it to design around the ability to let the player just kind of find their adventure and maybe funnel them into certain directions if you could kind of catch them, but also give that freedom and flexibility to just kind of explore?
Yeah, no, it was. You could have another interview with Andrew Fisher and talk to him about the challenges he had in turning it into an open world game. But I think the challenge, I think the challenge was trying to make sure we had touch points that kept things moving, regardless of what you ended up doing. And that was something that was really important to me. I was really inspired by I read Dungeon World. I think in 2019, the RPG book, and what really struck me about that book and the way that the game world was described there is they made a point of talking about the world as of existing outside of the player's actions, and to imagine what would happen in the world if the players took no actions. So I really wanted to have a similar thing with Earthborne Rangers, where the world feels alive, so that regardless of what you do, things are happening, and you can interact with those things or not. And it's really up to you. And we just needed to make sure we had a system in place that moved things along regardless of what your actions were. And that doesn't mean that the plot will like auto resolve. It's a different outcome if you don't engage, but there is an outcome, and that was a really important part. And I think that's kind of the secret of keeping the overarching narrative going in this open world experience, where you can really just strike off in any direction, do whatever the heck you want.
It was a great confluence of things in my life to have this come at the same time that Baldur's Gate just came out, right? And this realization that there are elements to this that are unpredictable, though accounted for. And that's what I love, like in playing Baldur's Gate, uh, there are so many things in the game where I'm like, oh my god, this is aware of this. Or I never expected a game to, be counting how many times I take a long rest or something, and then maybe I missed an opportunity because of it. And this game, because it's not necessarily a game where there's like a clean fail state, and there's also not a real fail forward element. It's not episodic in the way that a lot of campaign games are. You start becoming suspicious of everything, Andrew. That day clock on the top, you're like, should I camp? What's going to happen if I camp? What's going to happen with this lingering quest? And I love that it feels so vibrant and alive because of that. Even flipping one of the cards to see how you did on a skill check, and seeing that there's weather elements that are going to trigger based off of that were unpredictable, and then sometimes those lead into really niche and obscure and lengthy interesting things, like the level of machinations to get the essence of this game working is stupendous. I gotta imagine that you guys internally playtesting that, it must have been tremendously difficult.
Yeah, it is really, really hard. And I think it's also hard to, keep myself in check, because when I would play it, so I've played through it a couple times, and my most impactful playtest I did was spring of, man, has it been that long already? Spring of 2022. Yeah, spring of 22. And I wanted more and more reactivity. Like I kept having these moments that you can't plan for them in the outline. You have to just play the game and encounter the situation. And I'm like, well, if this is happening, then I want this to happen. I want this person to say this thing in this instance because of X, Y, and Z. So, if word count and page count were if it were an app,
I was about to ask, is there?
Then we could do anything. We could track all sorts of stuff.
Right.
I think the physical component is really important. So we wanted to try to check ourselves there, but yeah, I'm not gonna lie. There's a part of me that kind of wants an online campaign guide that we can just go nuts and do whatever we want.
Well, it occurred to me while I was playing, there is a limitation to keeping it as a physical product, which means that you'll have certain repetition if you were playing the same game over again. There's going to be a lot of distinct things that are different, but because it's, beginning point, you're going to run through the same narrative beats a couple times. You'll have certain instances happen, just like playing a video game. Even if you're playing an open world video game, you play Skyrim or Oblivion or whatever again, you're going to have certain things come up that are, oh, I remember that happening, even though it felt so emergent the time that you played it before. You really could come out with DLC for this game using all the same physical components as far as cards, but just coming up with new narrative moments. You really built a structure that allows you to just come out with oh, here's a print and play campaign if you're willing to print 25 pages or something, or just refer to a website or something. Then here's all kinds of different narrative beats that you could play with.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an important part of the design that I wanted in there, and that is definitely something that is intentional. Like the way that the journal entries are printed on the card and are not necessarily, the narrative isn't necessarily baked into the card itself.
Right.
Allows us to do anything with those cards that have those journal entries on them, and that is 100% part of the plan.
Well, then let's talk about the plan. First off, naming the company. You are Earthborne Games. You are clearly committed to this game itself. Was there ever any anxiety about are we pigeonholing ourselves by naming ourselves after our flagship product?
No, it was so yeah, that came out of a conversation I had with a former coworker when I was telling him about the company, and before I'd even it was when I was telling him about the company before we had the game idea in mind, and I was excited to share like that because I was going through a bunch of different names trying to figure out what's a good name. It's a lot of names are taken, let me tell you that.
It's like naming a band. I get it.
It is, yeah. uh, but yeah, settling on Earthborne was really exciting. And when I told it to him, he's like, "Oh, that's a really good name for a game." I was like, "Oh yeah, that is a good name for a game. You're right." And then it kind of just that's was kind of the leaping off point for me, from in my imagination to kind of run with the setting. But no, I think having it be Earthborne Rangers and we're Earthborne games. No, there's no not concerned or worried or I have full confidence. I knew what we're making was awesome. I believe in it, and I think it's an incredible game. And it's just one less name you have to remember.
I suppose that's true. I suppose that's true.
It's like Catan. Catan Studio makes Catan. Earthborne makes Earthborne Rangers. It's just easy to remember.
Then is that what your plan is going forward, or do you have lots of irons in the fire? Like, how committed are you to Earthborne Games is making Earthborne Rangers, and that's what we will be known for? Or are you already thinking about like, well, what's our Euro game, or like what's our soldiers on a map game going to look like? Are you thinking about diversifying the library?
Yeah, we're definitely not doing the FFG approach of like we need one game in every single category.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get there, but that's definitely not part of the plan. No, so yeah, we're very committed to the Earthborne setting and very committed to Earthborne Rangers. So the plan for Rangers is we have this campaign expansion that'll be coming out soon. We also kickstarted that at the time of the first game. We have an upcoming Game Found campaign where people can late pledge for that campaign expansion. They can get on board with the second printing of the game, and we'll have more Ranger cards you can get and all sorts of fun stuff. But the long-term plan for Rangers is we'll have this campaign. We have 2 more campaigns planned. We have more Ranger card expansions planned. I'm not sure how long that will take. It takes a very long time to make a game that's this detailed with this much writing, with this much art. It's a lot of work, and I don't think it's worth rushing, because if we rush it, then it's going to be bad. So I'm not sure how long it will take. I'm not sure how much we will grow. I'm not interested in being a huge company, but ideally, we'll I think if we can get to a spot where we're releasing a game a year, I think that's pretty nice. I'd like that. That sounds like a good pace to me. But yeah, so the next few years we'll be doing more Earthborne Rangers, and then we have a really huge idea for like the culmination of the story that I was just thinking about earlier today, again in preparation for this discussion. And in some ways, I think it might be even bigger than the core game in the end. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, so we'll do a lot of stuff with Rangers. We also have another game we've been working on for the past couple of years that we're going to be hopefully revealing to everyone at the end of this year, and then bringing to crowdfunding sometime next year. And I have one other idea that came to me very recently. I had a day where I just had all these ideas pour in for just a board game that is not an Earthborne setting game, but a game that I think would be really, really cool and speaks to a lot of what I enjoy in life. So yeah, we're really just what I tell the guys is I just really want to make games that we feel passionate about, we feel strongly about, that are games that we will enjoy. Like I feel like if we ever make a game where we say to ourselves, what do we think will sell?
You failed.
Then it's time to hang it up. Like I don't want to do that. I just want to make games that we feel inspired by. So yeah, we have one other significant iron in the fire, and then one that we're just kind of started talking about recently, but we got to get this campaign expansion done.
This might be the most PR question that I can ask, but what do you want people to think of as like the principles of your company? Because, like obviously you worked for a long time for the biggest dog in hobby board games, and or at least on this side of the pond. And towards the end there, it became less probably the type of company, or at least run with the same principles and ideas and goals than it was founded on and that you were accustomed to. And it seems like throughout this project, both through just like playing it as a product that I got to get my hands on, and then also talking to you and knowing what some of these sensibilities are, like what do you want people to think of as like core tenets of Earthborne games, or, core principles, convictions even?
Yeah, well, I think it's two things. It's the sustainable production. So like always trying to do as little harm to the earth as possible when we're making what we make. And to me, that means sourcing responsibly and creating games that aren't just going to, again, just go to a landfill and last on this earth forever and be here long after we're gone.
To be a remnant in the artwork of Earthborne Rangers.
Right, exactly. Like the goal is that eventually our games will biodegrade and be gone. That's not going to happen in our lifetimes, but the plan is that they'll go away.
This might be a little bit depressing, but I really hope that you put as a subtle dig, to maybe your least favorite game that you ever worked on, or, you were tangentially related to, and a component from that is, like a background shot in Earthborne Rangers, and, it's clearly being misused in some way. But has been adapted into, like a ritualistic totem or something that, has a shaman is wielding as a thing of power.
That's right. They're in a temple built of action figures.
A cyber demon from Doom,
Right. Yeah. So the production, the sustainability side of it is one thing, and the other thing is the types of stories we tell, the types of the themes, and creating experiences that are deeply enriching to the people who play them. Like that's something that's really important to me. I'm not interested in creating just kind of like frivolous diversions. I really want you to, when you play our games, to really feel invested and to feel that we put a lot of love and care and attention into it, and you can feel it coming through and that it affects you deeply. Like that's the goal. So hopefully people feel that way, and hopefully they feel like the thing that we made enriches their lives and they feel better for having played it.
Well, having never spoken to you in the past, Andrew, and only knowing a bit of your reputation and a little bit of the reputation of the team, and for the most part going in blind, that was the feeling that I got. So at least in that, it is clear that, this is an authentic game with a point of view that is, both something thoughtful, but also damn mechanically interesting. It's a gamer's game too. It's not just like a fluffy feel-good thing. It's like, oh my god, how are we going to navigate this thing? It's near and it's far, and I got to be able to get over this, and we're going to like exhaust this and be able to. It's a hell of a game, and I'm really impressed with what you have so far, and I can't wait to see what's on the horizon. I'm still working on the game myself and diving through and telling everyone here in Juneau, Alaska about it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about Earthborne games and Earthborne Rangers. Thanks for coming on the show, Andrew.
You're welcome, Jack. Thanks for having me.